SenseMaker is funded by the Google Digital News Initiative, and it's comprised of a number of partners. So there's UCLan in the form of the Media Innovation Studio, and colleagues in engineering and aerospace who are affiliated to the Engineering Innovation Centre. We've also an industry partner, Reach, specifically the Manchester Evening News. What the project tries to do is bring industry, researchers across a number of different disciplines, journalism, innovation, engineering, and work with communities in and around Manchester, and understand what types of data and information those communities want. And then we aspire to build sensors or sensing equipment that can capture that data that wouldn't otherwise exist, and then tell stories from that. So the data can be on pollution, it can be on footfall, it can be extracted from pictures and images, it can be things that we haven't yet imagined. But all of it is contributing to stories and journalism and storytelling, I think, in Manchester.
The thing that appealed to me was the idea that we would, instead of starting off with data and looking for a story in the data, we would actually be able to think, well, let's think of a story, and then think of a way of gathering the data that would tell that story.
We have got a number of different research interests, and for this project they all centred around what happens when you give journalists and communities the power to sense. What happens when you do that? So in terms of how the project came around, there was an opportunity from Google Digital News Initiative to bid for prototype projects, and this fits perfectly within that because prototype projects are all around experimentation, and we felt that this hadn't really been tested or trialled in the way that we're doing it before, so this was a good way just to see what would happen. First phase was around kind of some initial engagement, so we would term them, with communities. So we worked primarily with the Manchester Evening News, different parts of that business. So not just editorial, we worked with some of their commercial teams, some of their developing team, their data visualization unit, their editorial, their news desks. And we did two things really. We said to them, number one, what kind of stories are you working on? What kind of stories are you interested in? What kind of stories do you think might be intriguing to your audiences? And then we said, well, what kind of sensor packs would you build to tell those stories?
It was really good to get as many people as we could in the first workshops, and kind of why it was good to do that at the end to make sure it was kind of always kind of going back to what story can we tell with this, and it was good to kind of, rather than start with, okay, these are the sensors we've, in the past when we've done the hacks and things like that, we started, oh, these are the sensors you've got, what do you want to do with it? Whereas this one, it was kind of, what stories do you want to tell was how it started, and it was kind of the making sure that it always linked back to how would we use it, and what story would we tell with it?
So we're starting from a different angle, I suppose, and thinking, what issue could we explore? And instead of us then going to local authorities or government bodies and asking for the data that was available, maybe we could actually just build something that would gather the data that would support that story.
So the impact was to change things. We've done some interesting work around that, in that some of the pollution sensors, the air quality sensors and schools, those schools who we've only just really started working with are quite keen to take that data and to do something with it. And the newsrooms are quite keen not just to do a one-off story on that topic. They want to do a longer form piece. They want to really get under the skin of what's going on here and go down an avenue that could be called constructive journalism, which is something within journalism as an industry and as a scholarly pursuit that is very much an area of interest.
As the eco lead, I was posting some of the work that we were doing on our Facebook page, and we posted some of our eco pledges that we made in autumn. As a result of that, Paul got in touch from Manchester Evening News and said he'd seen the posts and told us about the SenseMaker project, and then said would we be interested in something along those lines.
What we were able to do was to give this school a sensor, an environment sensor, and it actually showed on the chart. You could see the spikes in various environmental detections, so the various gases, nitrogen dioxide and what have you, and it would show the spike that happened in the school on the school run. You know, the spike in the morning and the spike in the sort of mid-afternoon. And the school actually did a presentation to the parents, so they actually got some parents in and showed them this chart and said, this is what we've used this device that the MEN has provided us, and it's actually quantified the issue. It's actually you can actually see with your own eyes that actually, you know, polluting gases do spike around these moments, and when the children are going in and out of school. And they were able to say that, to make the case to the parents, to say, please, will you change the way you behave? So, for me, that was the best example of that actually happening, where we saw people using the data, in the community to try and effect some change.
Such a raw statistic, isn't it, that you can't argue it. It's not something that we've plucked from Google. It's an actual live statistic that's happened here now, within sort of the grounds. Well, not the grounds, but on the outskirts of the school. So they can't argue it, and so it gives us strength.
It's true, isn't it? Convenience wins because busy lives. Yeah.
You know, our only other option is sort of getting people to drive and not crowded areas to get the traffic patrol officers out, and that's not been effective at all. So I saw more impact from having the sensor and the data in terms of having something than threatening with the traffic patrol.
But like you say, how many of them are doing it because they're dropping and then going on somewhere? And I think your idea is interesting about how many could share that.
So maybe doing something like that, having a sort of central point, rather than, because I think sometimes my concern would be,
can't have this as a way of living, can we? We do have to find an alternative and let the children be aware of that. This is what their adult world's going to look like if we don't start thinking differently. And like I say, it's the habit change, it's the awareness, it's the wider social responsibility that convenience can't always win.
The idea that a school has been able to take that experience and to run with it and to respond to it and to do positive things in their eyes is amazing. And actually, that's the joys of research, in that, yes, you plan out your project, but you have no idea once you hit the real world what's going to happen, and you only can hope that it's going to be a good thing.
I really enjoyed the workshops as we did those, because it was kind of really interesting to see kind of people that had a completely different set of ideas of what they kind of wanted to make than what we like when we first talked about this project. There were a couple of similar ideas, things like pollution monitoring and all that side of things, but it was really interesting to see what someone who's completely outside the project, see what ideas they've got. And then going from that to kind of developing them and actually sort of then seeing, like going from the idea of the home sense that we came up with in the first workshop, kind of really going into the deep dive of seeing what we want it to do, how we want it to work, and then actually seeing the device working on my desk was kind of a really fun process.
We're both creating a sort of an environmental sensor system to pick up temperature, humidity, and different levels for monitoring of homeless people's environment where they're sleeping, so that they can report on the conditions that they're in. I always said that with engineers, if we just stick to what we're doing, we're going to be limited in a lot of areas because we can think in a certain way, but until you actually collaborate with other people with different courses of different specialties, we're never going to get that full potential that we could when it comes to designing products, solving problems and systems, because we have a lot of knowledge on one specific tiny area, and it requires actually sitting down and seeing where that can be applied. It's always fulfilling to know that what you're doing can be utilized for something that's for the greater good. If you're, one thing is to do some projects at university. Another thing is to actually see it being used in real world. There's definitely another feeling to that.
Yeah, I mean, I've really enjoyed working on the project, and I think all of the one of the things I found really interesting was going to when we did go to the school with a sensor, with the pollution sensor. We actually had the box that we were able to give them and put in their school. I just thought it was really interesting and encouraging, I suppose. It was with response, the enthusiasm that they had for the project. And similarly, we worked with the Levenshulme Bee Network as well, which is campaigning to improve pedestrian and cycleways in South Manchester, and there was just a real enthusiasm for it. And I think that's what I found most encouraging was the in these difficult times for journalism, for the MEN or for journalists to be able to go and speak to people in their community and come to them with an idea for a story, working with them. And seeing the enthusiasm for which they had for the project was really encouraging, and that was, I suppose, it gave an insight maybe into how local journalism could work better in the future with communities to solve problems and strengthen the bonds, I suppose, between a local journalism title and the community. And I think that's what was really encouraging for me from the project, was that we would be able to use sensors, use data sensors in the future to be sort of part of our normal news gathering and news reporting process, but one in which actually makes our journalism better, but also helps to build that trust and relationship with the people we're reporting on. And I thought that was the most interesting thing that came out of the project.
All of this hinges on the stories that you can tell with that data. And when we started the project, we were thinking about we talked about rich media. So we would have images or video or lengthy interviews that would translate this data. And I think one thing that I fundamentally believe about this project is that you need all of those constituent parts to try to reach the potential that this kind of work might have, because it's all about the lived experience of this stuff. It's not just a data dashboard. It's not just a new sensor that we've hooked up to the internet. It's not just using a LoRaWAN network in Manchester to communicate this information. You need all of it, and at its heart are people and the potential that data could create. And that's really important, I think. And when you get to the day-by-day nitty-gritty, when you get into full throes of a project and managing it and delivering it, sometimes you forget about some of that more fundamental element, I think, in terms of what you're trying to do. You're trying to pull all of these things together to see what happens.